Back in the day, Disney didn't own every company known to man. Only recently have they started playing their own game of Hungry Hungry Hippo, swallowing entire companies whole, and Marvel Studios was one of these entities that got eaten up by Disney. Mickey's really been throwing his cash around like Mr. Moneybags lately, but just buying as many profitable studios as possible wasn't enough for Disney. Oh no, they had to come up with their own rules as well. Before the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe experiment, Marvel faced extinction on more than one occasion, but now they're financially stable as long as they follow Disney's strict rules. We'll get into some scenes in MCU history that Disney would never allow today. While Disney acquired Marvel at the end of 2009 after Iron Man and The Incredible Hulk came out, the rest of Phase 1 solo movies were still distributed by Paramount. By the time the Avengers came out though, Disney was in charge. So by 2015's Age of Ultron, Disney had the reins for a while. They had been sticking to their original formula of letting directors put their stamp on things, but by Age of Ultron, they were also imposing a lot more on those directors. It was a change that wore director Joss Whedon out, making Ultron his last. Not that he didn't slip a gem or two past the generally more sensitive Disney people. Remember that relationship that Bruce Banner and Natasha had? The one that popped out of nowhere and then disappeared just as fast? During its momentary relevance, Tony Stark says the pair better not have been playing hide the zucchini when they were missing during a fight. Huh? Get it? Because he's green? And, well, for the rest of you, you'll have to ask your parents. These days, the dirty jokes are saved for the supporting teams and not the mainline Avengers. That was not the first time Joss Whedon slipped in a dirty joke under the Disney radar. The first Avengers, which was the final proof of concept for the shared cinematic universe, also had its blue joke. This one, however, was far more literary when Ragnarok and Endgame introduced us to a more relaxed Thor, or as some people called him, Bro Thor. It might be hard to remember Thor and Loki's downright Shakespearean beginnings in the MCU. Like, literally Shakespearean. The first Thor movie was directed by Kenneth Branagh, who's known for his Shakespearean adaptations. But Shakespeare isn't just iambic pentameter and tights. He was also someone who found a way to be crude in the fanciest way possible. That bit of the bard came back in Avengers when a frustrated Loki verbally lashes out at Natasha Romanoff, calling her a mewling quim. We're not even going to begin to tell you what that means. If you look it up on a school computer, will they be impressed with your language skills or upset at them? Hard to tell. Fancy wording or not, that kind of insult certainly is less in vogue for the king of the summer box office, the Disney-owned Marvel Studios. Tony Stark has always been one of the more dynamic characters in both the Marvel Cinematic Universe and in Marvel Comics. In fact, dating all the way back to Marvel's first shared universe, the 60s Gantry Lawrence animation show, The Marvel Superheroes, Tony Stark shares billing with his alter ego Iron Man in the intro music. As it turns out, Tony Stark makes you feel like he's a cool exec with a heart of steel. While other superheroes might have mild-mannered secret identities, Tony Stark doesn't do mild-mannered. Even before he dons his other power suit and privatizes world peace, he's already a public figure. That's why the Vanity Fair reporter with a degree from Brown University wants to interview him about his weapons manufacturing ways. The interview goes from friendly to confrontational pretty quickly as Tony cockily defends his record while trading quips. The final one is a question about whether or not Tony loses any sleep, to which Tony implies he's prepared to lose some with her. That's a terrible line, but then again, we're not Tony Stark. The movie then cuts to a scene of a less clothed Everhart with Tony Stark while a funky instrumental version of that cartoon theme plays. He was making her feel. Natasha Romanoff has had an interesting journey over the course of the Infinity Saga, especially for a character who hasn't had her own solo movie, not even a backdoor one like the Planet Hulk story in Thor Ragnarok. When we first meet Black Widow, she's Pepper Potts' slinky new assistant. When Tony sees her, he asks Pepper if he can have one. Ouch, right? How fast times change. Of course, plot twist, she's actually an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. sent by Nick Fury to keep an eye on the industrialist superhero. We do see her again as she becomes a full-fledged Avenger, but still using her feminine wiles to get people to underestimate her, including the god of mischief himself, Loki. As the Infinity Saga progressed, however, she transitioned from hip-focused camera shots and cracking skulls with her thighs to a more complex character. Even that was a bit of a bumpy ride, with Age of Ultron gaining some criticism for comparing being unable to have children to being with a monster. But by the time Endgame came around, she was leading the remaining Avengers and even made the big sacrifice to undo Thanos' snap. While Black Widow might have been the first butt-kicking woman we saw in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, chronologically, the title of first goes to the OSS agent and founding member of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Peggy Carter. Peggy Carter was the science attaché of the military program to bring Abraham Erskine's Super Soldier program to life. This involved gathering recruits as prospects for the Super Soldier program, with one scrawny guy from Brooklyn as the Dark Horse candidate. In the case of Captain America: The First Avenger, the movie was both a product of its time, being made before the Disney era, and a product of the time that it was set in. While the 40s might have been the big moment for the greatest generation, there were a few things that don't sit well with the modern world, like Carter comparing a soldier to her grandmother, or calling the soldiers ladies. It's one of those things that has been normal for a while, and a common trope of drill sergeants in movies. But a lot of things have been normal that maybe aren't the best ideas if you think about it. With Marvel ladies moving from supporting roles to ship-mashing headlining roles, these kind of comparisons start to feel more and more dated. Agent Carter and Black Widow aren't the only women who went through an evolution over the course of the Infinity Saga. All the way back in the very beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was Pepper Potts, Tony Stark's designated adult. It's a tough job, but someone has to do it, and it certainly isn't going to be Happy. I mean, he's a guy named Happy. In Iron Man, Pepper starts as Tony's executive assistant, doing what executive assistants do. Things like keeping her boss on the schedule he hired her to set, then acting like she's being unreasonable for doing her job. Cocky rich people can be a real pain to work for. Her other job is to clean up Tony's messes that he creates in his there are no consequences existence. One of those messes is the aforementioned Christine Everhart. After she does her spread on Tony, it's Pepper's job to usher her out the door. In the decade or so since Iron Man, opinions about shaming behavior has changed. Under the House of Mouse, that kind of behavior would probably be avoided at all costs. There are a lot of vices in this world. Some are simply little indulgences that make the person feel like they're alive. Then there are some that are just handy tropes to let you know how hard scrabble a character is. The pages of Marvel Comics have portrayed some bad habits in a medium that attracts a younger audience for years until recently. The biggest offender in this regard is smoking. Some of the more hard-living characters in the pages of Marvel Comics had a pretty hardcore 2/3 of a cigar habit. Before Nick Fury's redesign, he was often seen puffing on a stogie. It was the same with brash publisher J. Jonah Jameson, who demonstrated the enviable ability to curse out Peter Parker while never taking a cigar from his mouth. Perhaps the biggest smoker is Wolverine, who for a decade or so was almost never depicted without a cigar clenched in his teeth. Times have changed, however, and depictions of smoking and tobacco use have become more problematic. Back in the pre-Disney MCU, General Ross deals with losing the Incredible Hulk with a whiskey and a cigar, and even Obadiah Stane smoked one in Iron Man, which isn't the kind of representation Disney is likely to jump on today. There are other vices that become a little more tricky. By now, as a society, we've largely come to the conclusion that tobacco is bad, with people only deferring on whose job it is to do something about that. Alcohol, on the other hand, is both a staple of society and a ticking time bomb. If you drink and are fun, drinking is great. If you drink and do bad things, drinking is a problem. Drinking can go from not a problem to a problem without the person doing it noticing. At one point, Marvel decided to attack this problem head on by dealing with the alcoholism of one Tony Stark. The story that resulted, Demon in a Bottle, became legendary. It also proved too much for the comic book code, a voluntary content agreement that most publishers adhere to in order to wear their stamp of approval. The Demon in a Bottle storyline never made it to the screen, even in the Paramount era, but we did get a nod to it when Tony Stark gets wasted and dons his costume to show off to his party guests. This enrages Rhodey, who runs off with a suit of armor of his own. In the Disney era, that would be too much. Did we mention that Tony Stark was a bit of a playboy? That Tony Stark makes you feel like he's a cool exec with a heart of steel? When asked what he is without his suit, playboy is at least 1/4 of that. It's more than just well-educated Vanity Fair reporters being taken instantly by the cocky industrialist who would eventually become a superhero. It's the one aspect of Tony Stark's personality that's constantly reinforced. It's a bit of a contrast to his billionaire superhero counterpart over at the distinguished competition, whose playboy persona, Bruce Wayne, is a construct to throw people off of the scent that he might also be the super serious Dark Knight of Gotham City. For Tony, it's not an act, it's a lifestyle. One he's so committed to that on his private jet, there's a retractable stripper pole on his plane for in-flight entertainment. Over the last few years, the stripper pole has come into its own, even becoming a fitness trend, but we're pretty sure it wasn't installed on Tony's plane to give his crew a chance to catch up on their cardio during long flights. Disney would probably prefer to lean away from stripper or anything. Perhaps one of the more adorable moments that turned the story in Endgame towards the Avengers reuniting for the time heist involved Tony Stark swearing when his hypothesis works out and his daughter hears it and then repeats it. The whole sequence ends with perhaps the sweetest moment in the MCU when Morgan says that she loves her dad 3000. That's crazy. But it does contrast a bit of an evolution over language in the MCU. Whether it's Paramount as a distributor or Disney as owner, most superhero movies don't want to go past that coveted PG-13 rating. Traditionally speaking, movies with R ratings open on 2/3 the screens that a PG-13 or less movie opens on, which is down to the theater's needs, with sometimes as much as 90% of the ticket price on opening weekend going to the distributor. Exhibitors prefer screen space going to movies that'll bring families and dates who might buy concessions. So unless they're standouts like Deadpool or Logan, PG-13 is as far as most studios are willing to go. Pre-Disney, however, Marvel was more willing to skirt the line, like during the hearings on Iron Man 2, where a senator has a televised bleep swear for Tony. As we already discussed, by the time Age of Ultron came around, Joss Whedon was eyeing the door. The iconic director, who had been given more of a free rein when the Avengers was an ambitious experiment, was now faced with the pressure of maintaining a hot property and leading it to a conclusion outside the scope of the movie he was making. One of the more famous conflicts was between including the story elements that Whedon wanted versus foreshadowing the final coming of Thanos as the Infinity Saga started to kick into high gear. Under the radar of those larger issues came a few more jokes of the Mewling Quim variety. A few of them came in a victory party that the team had after eliminating Hydra. But you know what they say about killing Hydra? Yeah, they'll always be around. When the team starts to discuss the finer points of the enchantment on Thor's hammer, they start taking turns trying to lift it. First up is Clint Barton, who receives some heckling from Tony Stark about not being able to get it up. While it happened under Disney, jokes about impotence are still a little off-brand for the family-oriented company. Turning an Avengers party into a VIAGRA ad was perhaps the mildest of the insinuations during the sequence where the Avengers took turns trying to lift Thor's hammer. Thor's hammer bore an enchantment placed on it by Odin to make sure his son learned some responsibility. Ever since then, the hammer has been the judgy center of various heroes' worth in the MCU. In Endgame, a demoralized Thor found his strength when, after a chat with his mother, he discovered that he was still worthy of Mjolnir. Vision gained the trust of the rest of the Avengers as Tony and Bruce's second self-aware android by being able to handle the hammer. And of course, in the epic climax of Endgame, Captain America finally picked up the hammer and started hitting Thanos with it. But none of the people who have wielded it have bothered with the more regal obligations of the inscription, that Thor is a role as much as a person, and that role is heir to Asgard. Tony suggests that in that role, he'll introduce prima nocta, a practice where royalty would claim the right to a first night with one of their subjects' brides. A little racy for the home of the small world bride. There's no getting around the subject. Superheroes do a lot of punching and kicking, and blasting, and dropping, and generally wrecking things. No matter how smart the superhero might be, at least a fair amount of their solution to the supervillain problem is going to be causing some damage. Generally speaking, the surroundings take the brunt of it all. There are a few reasons for this. First off, it's a great way to show the scale of the conflict. While we might punch someone or hurt our hand as much as anyone else, when a superhero punches someone, they tend to go through a wall. Want to show someone who's really powerful? Have them break apart a moon and drop it on their enemies. The other reason is that while superheroes revolve around punching and kicking and shooting and exploding, showing the toll that could take on a regular body can get a little gruesome for a property that hopes to also sell a bunch of toys. Earlier in the MCU, some of these graphic depictions of violence were on display, like when Captain America sends a Hydra soldier into a spinning propeller. Since then, the scale has gone up, but that graphic nature has gone down. It's not just concerns about appeasing the MPAA and parents who have to buy their kids tickets and Avengers toys or the changing landscape of our sensibilities that mark a contrast with the early MCU and the Disney-led MCU that we have now. There are factors that have more to do with the whole MCU trying to find its way and adopt a formula that works. As a result, titles like Captain America have moved from the retro cool looks of Rocketeer director Joe Johnston to the modern spy thrillers of the Russo brothers. The biggest change, however, is the Shakespearean feel Kenneth Branagh brought to Asgard with the first Thor movie. It's hard to imagine now, but at the time, the Asgardians would ride horses across the Rainbow Bridge to reach the Bifrost. By the time the third Thor movie came out, gone was the Shakespearean trappings and the Warriors 3, and in its place was quirky indie director Taika Waititi, known for things like the mockumentary What We Do in the Shadows. This Thor bore more of a resemblance to the James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy movies that had turned an obscure Marvel property into a fan favorite. This style seems to be the MCU's future. A lot of these changes come down to the issue of creative control, and who has it? Marvel movies continue to seek out creative talent from independent and smaller films. But after 11 years, more than 20 movies, and billions of dollars, they're more prone to keeping a tighter rein on those creators. It's not just Joss Whedon's frustrations making Age of Ultron. There was another visionary director who actually actively campaigned for a specific character to enter the MCU, only to have that property taken away over creative differences in the final project. Edgar Wright, famous for movies like The Atmospheric Baby Driver, had a very specific vision for Ant-Man. That was enough for Disney to greenlight the project, but not enough to let Wright finish it. Even off-screen differences can make the House of the Mouse nervous, highlighted with James Gunn's firing over old tweets and subsequent rehiring after fan backlash. Which is not to say that Marvel still won't rely on directors from smaller films with distinct styles, because that formula is also part of what makes Marvel the powerhouse that it is. There's no better example than the Ryan Coogler-led Black Panther, which was so well received that it even managed an Oscar nomination for Best Picture, a rare achievement for a superhero movie. Those are some of the things that probably won't fly at a Disney-owned MCU in the future. What do you think they wouldn't be able to get away with today? Let us know in the comments, and you can still totally get away with subscribing to CBR for all of our latest videos. Thanks for watching.